Hello, colleagues. In this episode, I would like to describe the middle range theory of coping. This is found on page 222 in the Middle Range Theory book of Sister Callista Roy. And this particular chapter was written by Sister Callista Roy. All of the various chapters describing middle range theories were built from research. In each case, studies were identified that utilized the Roy Adaptation Model. These were reviewed, weighed, outcomes and processes were identified. And by compiling these, each of the authors of the different chapters looked at how you would construct a middle range theory utilizing the various materials located in evidence existing in the literature. So all of the work that I'm describing has been grounded in evidentiary research and pulled together through a theoretical analysis process and review. In looking at the middle range theory of coping, Sister Callista, let's see if I can share screen here. Sister Callista chose to use the three major types of conceptualizations: the stimuli, the coping strategies or processes, and the outcomes. And you will see that this is repeated throughout the various middle range theories that we'll be talking about. In looking at the stimuli, remember we'll be looking for focal stimuli, contextual stimuli, and in some cases residual stimuli. In looking at coping strategies, we'll be looking for individual strategies of cognator or regulator and group strategies of stabilizer and innovator. And in outcomes, we will be looking at various outcomes across the adaptive modes: physiologic, self-concept, role function, and interdependence. As you look at the model of middle range theory, you will see each of these components identified. However, in this chapter, you will see it done in a way of synthesis. So several different kinds of coping are subsumed or included in this particular model. So let's look and see what some of the elements are in this particular schema of middle range theory of coping. If you think about how and when and why we cope as human beings, you know that some of the immediate causes could be aging, which is somewhat a slow process, or chronic pain, which could also be a slow process. It could also be a more acute onset. We know that there are perceived stress of caregiving. If you've ever done caregiving for a family member, and all of us as nurses are caregivers, and we know that over time that stress builds up. The stressor or perceived or focal stimulus of a terminal illness or the death of a loved one. These are all precipitating events, focal stimuli, or factors contributing to the need for coping. In the contextual level, we know that there are differences by race and gender that affect how we cope. We know that there is a difference in caregiver burden. Caregiver burden over time is both a developed skill and a limitation of our ability to cope. We know that there is available and enacted social support. Some families have very strong social support, others less, more socially distanced or socially isolated. We know that sometimes there is conflict in social support. Even within our healthcare systems, we know that sometimes physicians or nurses, healthcare providers, and families do not always agree on the best course of action. When we bring in hospice, most of us would agree that is a positive factor in chronic illness management or certainly end-of-life care. However, bringing in hospice support can also change the context. It can be both a stressor and a stress reliever. So these are some of the types of focal and contextual stimuli which might lead to a need for coping. What are some of our coping strategies in these varied environments? And remember, this is a synthesis, so it is a number of varied environments. Well, first of all, there's active coping, self-talk, consulting our resources, consulting our support system, bringing in others, active non-religious support. There's religious support, prayer, chaplains, ministers who come to provide support to families. And just in the act of prayer or faith, many people would say they are comforted and that has helped them to cope. Passive avoidance is not usually considered a coping strategy, a positive coping strategy, but it is certainly a strategy by which most of us cope. It's hard to deal with difficult situations. It's hard to deal with conflict. It's hard to deal with a rapidly deteriorating health condition or a situation in which the people are not working together. So sometimes avoidance of conflict is one of the ways that we cope. Cognitive and emotional ways of perceiving vary. Sometimes we are very astute. We perceive all the details. Sometimes life is in a fog. All of those are differing ways of coping as we try to adapt or support others in adapting. But this one I, of course, really like, and that is creativity. How often have we used our creative instincts, our creative capacities to come up with new ways of addressing problems, new strategies, new individuals to bring into a process, ways of creating art or hope? These are creative strategies, things that build capacity, things that build our ability to interact as human beings. So what outcomes are we hoping for in this middle range theory? We want to see adaptive self-concept responses so that a person's dignity is affirmed, their ability to understand the world around them is strengthened. We want decreased psychological distress. We want them to come to grips with their fears, their anxieties, and their sadness. We want their spiritual well-being intact so that they can draw upon that faith, they can utilize their support persons, and that they can know that there is always hope. We want to talk with them about their adaptive role responses. Are they serving in a reasonable capacity as mother, father, wife, husband, son, daughter, or other roles? How are they with peers and friends, colleagues, and business acquaintances? How have they adapted in their roles given the need for coping? And then their ability and satisfaction in caring for another person. As we see, the caregiver burden can be strengthened so that they not only are better at caregiving, but they feel more fulfilled in their role as caregiver. All of these kinds of stimuli, coping strategies, and outcomes are important in helping us understand the processes of adaptation. Being a nurse with a theoretical framework or a middle range theory guiding our practice strengthens our practice, because then we see how the many, many factors, the focal and stimuli factors, the coping factors, and the outcomes work together to establish adaptation. These are some of the ways that we work together to have a holistic, dynamic, and effective way of intervening as nurses and practicing to promote adaptation.